I'm going to turn us around here.
Yay.
Hello,
Hello.
LinkedIn. This is so exciting. Here today with our third episode of Community Unplugged, which has been just so cool to have these great conversations. And I'm going to introduce our special guest today in a minute, but we dreamed up Community Unplugged. My team started talking about it because I was having all these amazing conversations with community builders and wishing afterwards I'd recorded it because they say such insightful things. It's such an interesting spot to talk to somebody else who also lives in that community connective role. And I just hadn't realized what I was missing before I started to meet lovely people like Cecilia, who's joining us here today. And our whole goal here is for listeners, if you're listening in, please feel free to share where you're from. If you have questions for our lovely community builder who's joining us, throw them in the comments. But the goal here is to just bring a fresh perspective from somebody who's been doing this kind of work for quite some time and has not only the background, but just the creativity to look at community differently for those of you who are kind of wondering what it might be about. So I'm Tasha. Some of you may know me already. I'm building community at the nonprofit Hive, and I'm working on a tool for community building called Community Hives on the side. And one of my newer friends in the community building ecosystem is Cecilia Wessinger, and she has been building community and is now in a brilliant consultancy, mass collaboration, and doing so much beautiful work. But I am going to take a pause and let her introduce herself and her journey, because I think it's always so interesting to hear people describe how they got into community building. So thanks so much, Cecilia, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a joy to be here. So Tasha and I met because a common friend of ours, Yuri, hosts a community convening. So community builders get on and we talk for, I guess, like a speed dating round. And you never know the kind of people that you meet, but we started talking and then it was like, oh wait, we have to talk further. So I'm glad that Tasha and I have had several conversations since then. How I got started in community building? Well, I was a serial volunteer. So I just showed up at stuff and raised my hand and said, I want to get involved. And I helped with events, with projects, with initiatives, whatever it was that I was interested in. I just wanted to put my energy behind it because sometimes you donate money and for a cause that you believe in, and I wasn't always in a position to make a big donation, but I wanted to make a big impact. So the only way that I knew to make a big impact was to get involved in community. So as I got involved in community, I got engaged in entrepreneurship because I got fired from a soul-sucking job and jumped headfirst into entrepreneurship because I was an entrepreneur of need, which means I needed to put food on the table and to pay my bills. And as I got involved in that community, I became lead organizer of a community initiative called 1 Million Cups that was sponsored by the Kauffman Foundation. And then I got an invitation from the Kauffman Foundation that said, hey, we'd like to invite you to a conference on ecosystem building. And I said, what the hell is ecosystem building? And they said, the thing that you do. And so I help people navigate and find resources. And that's how I got here. So it was a strange, weird path, but
I love it. I love it. And I know that conversation in Yuri's group, it was like, I think the breakouts are like 7 minutes or something bananas. And it felt like we had just gotten started, both realized we'd both been in the nonprofit space building community, and that's just such an interesting landscape to be building ecosystems in, because it feels very natural in many ways. I think that gathering of people in nonprofit and very values aligned, but community is often also used as a word for products and for now a whole slew of different things that it's still correct. Those are communities, those do become ecosystems, but it also, the nonprofit world holds a special place, I think, in the community building arena.
Yes, because you can't just throw resources at it and make it scale, right? It doesn't blossom because you've just added another zero to your ad campaign kind of thing.
Exactly. If anything, a lot of the traditional ways that other people build communities, I think, just don't work often in the nonprofit space at all. So this is going to lead me into set me up perfectly for your next question I had for you, because what's one project, story, or moment you're most proud of in your community work?
So in following along on that journey from the Kauffman Foundation's initial summit, this e-ship summit that brought together ecosystem building practitioners and these national resource providers, so these regional larger organizations into one space. I walked into this room, there were 450 people in this room that I really didn't know. It was the most beautiful room I've been in, 47% women, 29% people of color, mostly in the United States. And we started talking about stuff I'd never thought to talk about. It was systems level thinking and complexity science and all this geeky stuff. And I didn't understand most of it, but I liked it and I got involved. And so following on that, I ended up becoming a consultant for the Kauffman Foundation because they brought in somebody, me, and my colleague Christine, to help support the community. And in this work, you talk to a lot of people, and you just kind of regurgitate this story. Oh, this is important. This is crucial. This is how it can be of assistance. And along the way, I've had people come back to me and tell me, oh, that playbook that you all wrote, that's like my Bible. I studied this, I've learned about this, and now I get to meet somebody who co-authored this work. And that's a powerful thing to know that you've impacted people's lives and in ways that you don't know.
It is so, at least for myself, I just truck along, like, I think that is the thing, that there's a lot about community building that is replicable day after day, and you're doing the similar work and you continue to build relationships, and you sometimes don't even realize the impact. For some people who haven't experienced that feeling of belonging or finding their space, and it is really powerful. And I think that's part of what being a community builder has gotten a little bit addictive for me, is that, like, oh my goodness, this is so cool to know that behind the scenes, something that I help put together is creating this additional impact somewhere else, that you just had you don't know where it'll go, but you throw out, to the universe, all of this serendipitous community building, and then you go, oh wait, oh my goodness, what's happening over here afterwards? I love that moment that you shared, because it's one of my favorite parts of it as well.
Yeah, strangers come up to you and say you've changed their lives, and that's incredible. And it's not that you set out to do this, right? It's not about me, but the fact that you've had some impact in a positive manner, that's huge.
Absolutely. This is going a little off script, but I think it's really important too, just because we're starting to talk about something that I'm struggling with and figuring out. But with these ecosystems that you've helped to create and flourish, I often find it's really tough because the community builder starts to kind of sit in the center really naturally, without maybe meaning to, but they're like the engine behind the passion, right? That sometimes brings people together. How have you found that's played out when you have been the ecosystem builder? How have you gotten yourself, obviously you still want like that connective piece where people connect back to you, but you also kind of want to spread it out, right? Like that the community gets the credit sometimes, also not just the community builder.
It's a challenge because you have to get enough recognition so you can get sustainable work, right? That you apply to grants and you share that you were involved in this thing, and or that you get hired to work at an organization. But at the same time, it's not about you, right? It's about the mission or the vision of what you want to bring together. And that's incredibly hard because you have to balance. We We talk about that. Some friends of mine laugh because I say this all the time. There's a big difference between ecosystem building and ecosystem building. And
Yes.
so when you hear people talk about I did this and I did that, that's a big amount of ecosystem building, and that doesn't help anyone but you. But in the long run, it doesn't really help you because who wants to be part of that, right?
Yeah.
So it gets, I think you have to put things top of mind. One of the things that we do in the entrepreneurial world is to remember to put the founders in the center. I don't want to say that we rely on everything that the founders need, because
Yeah.
entrepreneurs are very needy people, right? They don't know what they need most of the time. They're doing something that's never been done before. So
Yeah.
it's about them, but it's not led by them because they don't know which direction to go. And that's where ecosystem builders help navigate so that you don't go down the rabbit hole or you don't get lost in whatever direction that you're going in. So you're kind of a, I wouldn't say a guide, and I try to ask people not to use the word Sherpa, because Sherpa doesn't mean guide. Sherpa is actually like a tribe of people that live in a certain area. They are Sherpas, but that kind of assistant, that co-navigator, which helps you just not fall off the trail.
Yeah. I love that. That's fantastic. I was like, I really feel like she's got a pretty good answer for this. So thank you for humoring me. But one of the other questions I wanted to ask, and you've been in this space for quite some time across many ecosystems, including global, but what are some of the toughest challenges you see communities facing right now?
Well, the incredible polarization that's going on in the world right now is tough, right? Because you have to do things together. People need people, and so the focus should be on what we can only do together. And I think a lot of people assume that the challenge is about people that will dissent or argue or point out things that aren't working, and that's not actually the problem. It's noisy and it could be tough to deal with, but we tend to quiet dissent. And the thing is, the people that complain, they care about something.
Yeah.
So the reason that they're sharing this with you is because they care to make it better. Now, they may not get it all right, but at least they've pointed it out. And what we tend to do is to quiet them down, put them off on the side, placate them, or hide them in a corner, and then you just keep going. And they might go away, and you realize that it gets a little more quiet, which you think is great, but it's not, the problem isn't solved. The people go away. The problem never goes away. So somebody else is going to come along and tell you, hey, this thing isn't working. And you'll go, oh, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it. And it's fine. And then you just keep going. And again, these people may go away because they realize that you don't care to address the problem. You don't care to think about what other people care about. You just kind of keep going on your own track. And I think that that's one of the toughest challenges. The other one is, how do you get people together that think about things in different ways?
Yeah.
So just
Yeah.
because they approach it differently, it's a cultural thing, right? So that's tough to navigate the cultures. And we're not just talking about diversity, equity, inclusion. It really is about a sense of belonging.
Yeah. I think that's so on point because both of the things you said, because I see frequently in nonprofit a hesitation for feedback because, oh, if we get feedback then we have to do something, right? But there's different levels of feedback too, right? Like there is feedback where people didn't like the food at an event, and those, like maybe it's worth noting, so you change the menu maybe, but is that one of those critical components? But I think everyone's afraid and scared of those big structural questions that they just don't often, nonprofits won't have the funding to even look at those, like, right, like that's the biggest challenge sometimes is, oh well, now we know as soon as we know, and we've confirmed it, even though we probably have an idea that this is how people feel, we might have to do something or take that next step. When I also think that there's something bold as community builders, as people who host communities and people, to go, I love that you're passionate about this change. How would you help us do this given the following constraints? And then you're inviting people to be a part of the solution. Because also sometimes when people hear what you're up against, they're like, oh, I'm so sorry that I've been harping on this. Yeah, that seems totally impossible. But I think everyone's so concerned about the appearance piece of what can be done, that instead that they're forgetting that, passionate people might actually find cool solutions for you that you haven't even invited them in for. I think that's great. And when the culture piece, which I'd love for you to jump in more on, because I think there's something there. I think we forget that, alignment is big and values are big, and people from different lived experiences, backgrounds, all of that can still come together into some pretty cool values and alignments, even though everything would suggest that, if we weren't paying attention to other people, oh my goodness, they have the exact same feelings as me, despite everything else being different up to this point in our lives. But I don't know, I find people have often more in common when they come into community because of values, right? Than it's actually lived experience, from my experience, at least so far.
So I think values are interpreted differently depending. And I'm not saying that, one is not right and one is wrong. And I think one of the examples I share often is, and I don't want to get very political about this, but Jonathan Haidt, who's a social psychologist, wrote a book called The Righteous Mind. And he talked about the values of conservatives and liberals. And, where a liberal will look at fairness. So thinking about things being fair as an equal distribution of resources. So everybody has a little something, and that's a fair thing, right? Because it's equally distributed. Where conservatives may look at it and say, well, what would be fair is I worked hard for my money, so I get to decide what to do with my money. And that's fair too. Neither one of them are wrong. They just look at things in a different way. It's still the same word. And so you could be using the same word in a conversation and mean two different things. Now, the one great accolade I will make for Jonathan Haidt's book is that I don't think you could read it and figure out whether he's conservative or liberal. So
interesting.
Just a bump up. He's a fascinating person. But I think that thinking about things in a way that it's not you're right and I'm wrong, that's not the idea, right? Yeah. The idea is to understand why you think of it this way, or what your experience is, or what your culture does. So there's a cultural assessment that I facilitate about behavioral preferences. And there are 10 behavioral preferences, like your relationship to time and money and ambiguity and context and all of those things that affect the way that you show up in the world. And how do you work with people that aren't like you? And that's something I learned a lot about when I was part of the Global Entrepreneurship Network. I'm still an advisor, but talking to people of different nationalities and it's interesting. So trying to be mindful of that as you do it.
Well, I'm going to have to go and check out this book. I also love every time I do one of these, I discover a new resource I haven't heard of. So this is great. I'll have to put it in the comments. Biggest opportunities that exist because of community. What would you say the big opportunities are right now?
I think that it's always been about people, right? And so the more you open yourself up to working with people that aren't like you, means that you're attracting a different audience, a different demographic, a different mindset, and you actually have greater impact because it's not just what lives in your brain, but it's the hive mind. And that's a lot of the things that you do, Tasha, is you get people together that may not connect any other way. And then they talk about things and they realize that they have things in common or a different approach that might work because you're frustrated at the way that you've always done things, and it's not working or whatnot. So I think the biggest opportunity is in this very connected world to be able to take advantage of meeting people that don't live where you live, don't speak like you speak. It's and to learn that there's other ways of doing things.
It is really, I wrote a post last week about going home for Thanksgiving, and because our Thanksgiving here in Canada was just this past weekend, and this was the community that I was born to. And it's a really small, at my family Thanksgiving, I know my fourth cousins, like this is, and they all descended from one 10-year-old who came over as an orphan during the potato famine. Like it's a whole vibe, very deep family connections. It also, our value is very much around family, but we have many different values that as I've gotten older, as I moved away to go to school, as I started the nonprofit Hive and hearing and meeting so many people who have actually probably more aligned values with me, but are totally different. Everything else about us is so, it's been amazing to learn so much more than I had ever imagined from talking to individuals, in New Zealand who on paper, maybe, it makes sense as a nonprofit, but they're doing something totally different in nonprofit in New Zealand. And I would have missed out on that if I just tried to read an article talking about New Zealand compared to Canada as nonprofit. I think there's a piece of it that we miss when we don't get into conversations with others. And as my horizons have broadened drastically since I left home 22 years ago, it is amazing to go back and reflect on where you come from. And I think it's still important to do those things, but it's also, I know that my world is so much bigger from having all of those additional pieces afterwards. And I think that's the one beauty of the age of connection that we are in, that I think most of us are not often grabbing a hold of it and realizing like there is so much out there and you could talk to anyone almost, right? Or very close to it.
Yeah, I think it's funny that you said that about finding about your roots and things. This year is a milestone year for me, so I celebrated a birthday with a 0 at the end of it, and I decided to take a roots tour. So I just got back from Japan, which is the country I was born in.
Amazing.
But my family's not from Japan. Everybody in my family is from Taiwan. So in a couple of months for Christmas, I'll be going with my son to Taiwan, which I haven't been to for a number of years. And so part of this journey is finding out what helped curate the person I am.
Yeah.
But also making me think about what I want to bring forward as I go into the next chapter of my life, what I want to hold dear and what I want to let go of. And so that kind of assessment, I think you should do along the way. It doesn't have to be a milestone, but along the way, you've got to think about what baggage are you holding, what skeletons are you bringing with you, and also what's new and expanding. So I'm in 2 weeks, I will be going to 2 countries I've never been to.
Amazing.
Exploring that, because why not? Life is short when things have to happen, right?
Well, and the first people, while many of the things I believe and feel strongly about, my family does not feel strongly about. I'm purposely wearing spicy t-shirts sometimes just to drive everyone nuts. I am that girl. But at the same time, these are the folks who taught me rituals and what it meant to live in community, what it meant to be cared for, rituals like Thanksgiving that, my family's been going back since 1942 for Thanksgiving every year. Right. And so it's a long time, a long history. And, and so those little moments also, I think if you can, like you said, find the parts of it that serve you well and are beautiful and help bring those things forward. But it is an interesting spot to find yourself going, well, I learned these things here, and these are the people who taught me that this mattered. Like some of these things even mattered.
Right.
I love this. Well, we have to catch up about your trip because that's amazing. This is the question I wanted to kind of finish off about because, I think, I look at my friend Cameron. I love the idea of a roots tour. Oh, I love this.
I hope you go on one and let us know all about it
know.
too, Cameron.
Yeah. If someone listening wants to build belonging in their own community, what's that piece of advice you'd give to them?
I think, well, from my experience, building belonging is really about caring about the individual that you're in community with, or the individuals. So there's a great book called The Culture Code, where it's somewhere on my shelf. I have to pull it down, but it talks about taking time to engage with the person, right? And then finding something that's unique about the person. And then the actual part of belonging, which is different than getting acquainted and building friendships, is that there's a future set, so that there's something that you're going to do in the future. You and I talk about, you know what, I can't wait till the next conversation. So something in our mind says that we have a future together, and that we'll be doing something together. And that creates a sense of belonging, because that means that we're connected in a way that's not transactional. This is relational. So that's that sense of belonging that you create, is all of those things. Frameworks are really important too. My good friend Fabian Portmuller, who created, along with a lot of people, this community canvas. If you Google community canvas, you'll see this template of things that you should think about when you're building community. What's the mission, the visual, the rituals, the cadence of how a community comes together. And then there's a next level thing that I was honored to be part of, which is called the community weaving. And so if you look up community weaving, it talks about what brings a community together. What's the spiral that we navigate as we engage richly in community, and then we step back occasionally. And so there's that ebb and flow as well. So those are great resources, and it's an amazing thing to really dissect what community means and what community can be.
I love all of this. I feel like I'm going to have to drop so many links in after this, because you've dropped so many cool things. If you have any of them, please throw them in the comments after this. You had a beautiful visual here. Would you like me to pull it up just for you to explain it quick? Is that okay?
I don't know if we can do it really quickly, but I'm happy to do that. Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna bring it in.
Okay.
I'm gonna remove this just quick, because I do love it. I think it's so beautiful.
So this came out of a conversation that a couple of us had when we were part of this Kauffman Foundation, this effort around ecosystem building. And we talked about how you get to mass collaboration. How do you get everyone to coalesce and work together? And so it all starts with an invitation, because if you don't put out an invitation, people don't know where to get involved, how to get involved, whether or not to get involved, right? And your invitation should be bold and specific. It's not just, come and do your thing. I think that's some of the challenges of the 99% movement, is everybody came with an agenda and they didn't have this one thing. So what we've realized is the framework that you build under, it starts with this invitation. And then you focus on community building. So it's about relationships and creating that sense of belonging and talking to each other. And so information goes back and forth. And then you create a kind of scaffolding, so that when you build something together, that it goes in, all the energy goes into a specific spot, right? And that's where, because otherwise, if you don't work together for specificity, then all the energy dissipates. And that's kind of what happens to movements where you don't have a set goal or framework. Then with the communication is visibility. It's not about hiding something. It's about the fact that you don't know what's available. So making sure that people see what's happening and this open communication happens. It's not, oh, this is a need to know or whatever. The information is there so you can see it, but it doesn't have to be shoved in everyone's face, right? The fact that you can access the information creates that, again, that sense of community and relationship and all of those things around community. Then you get to coordination and alignment. And coordination and alignment are kind of like traffic laws. Traffic law, you don't have to follow the traffic laws, but if you don't follow the traffic laws, chances are you're going to crash. So the reason that you coordinate and align is for better movement and better flow. And so if you wanted to go from point A to point B, you would go in a straight line as fast as you can. Why do you stop for the stop signs? Why do you slow on the side streets where there are children playing? It's because it all goes back to further down with that sense of community. People that care about community follow traffic laws. People that don't usually don't, because it's about them and where they want to go. And once you get that alignment, then you get to collaboration. So that's the thing. And when we started this, it looked like a triangle, like a Maslow's pyramid. And we realized that the idea isn't to get to a pinnacle on top. It's to actually grow something bigger than what you could do without everyone else, right? So, and all of that progress takes time. So everything moves at the speed of trust. And that's my very abbreviated.
I was going to say, if anyone's listening and wants to reach out to Celia, I'm going to put her information up. But I love this. And I know, at least in the nonprofit sector, one of the things that was really shocking to me early on was this idea that people would be like, oh, well, I just need to meet somebody else who's also doing X and we'll collaborate. It was like, there is so much in the middle here. But even from funders saying, find a collaborator. Okay, well, that has a whole bunch of things for it to succeed. You can fast track and remove a whole bunch of these middle pieces and try. And sometimes it happens. And I think when there's a bunch of money involved, as in startup founders sometimes collaborate, even when it's not a collaboration, but they do it in order to advance. But in at least the nonprofit sector, the incentives are completely different for the entire team as well, right? So it's always so interesting. But I love this because this has very much been my experience of people going, oh, let's just collaborate. And you're going, oh, no, there's a whole bunch of steps before this, for me at least, that I look at. Well, this is amazing. I know we're over time. I knew it was never going to happen this quickly. Thanks to Cecilia, because she's amazing. So if anybody's listening, and get in touch with her. She's obviously phenomenal, as you've seen. And this is why I knew I had to have her on to connect and talk. And you just brought in so many different pieces that I feel deep meaning from. And I think you're so right that there are some of these cultural pieces to ecosystem building that we often aren't necessarily thinking of. And you gave me some real food for thought in my own community building journey to kind of keep going forward. So thank you so much for joining me for this.
Thank you for having me. It's always fun to talk to you. And I feel like there's a whole lot of rabbit holes that we're going to go down together.
Yes,
so I look forward to that.
Amazing.